Hey guys, it's Sandro here, and today's video is a direct comparison of RainX Pro Graphene Spray Wax versus Armor All Ceramic Spray Coating versus Bowden's own bead machine paint sealants. Now, as the title of this video suggests, this comparison really came about wanting to explore if in fact there is a real benefit or difference in a spray sealant wax or coating having a graphene content compared to an SiO2 or ceramic content, and lastly to a more traditional polymer based content, or at least with no graphene or ceramic based ingredients. Now, apart from that angle of interest, these are also three products from three well-established detailing brands that I was yet to try on my ever-growing list of products to review. So after spending a little time testing them out, I thought I'd put together this video to help display how they perform in several areas, from the user experience to looks, feel, water behavior, and potential durability. So let's get to it. The first area of assessment was the user experience. So how hard, easy, quick, difficult, or time-consuming are they to apply? Starting with RainX Graphene, it has a very typical spray sealant recommended application in that you directly spray it onto a small panel section, wipe it into the area with a primary cloth, and then buff it streak-free with a secondary cloth. Now overall, the application seems fine with no real issues. It's fairly easy to spread and even to buff streak-free. However, one thing that did stand out to me was that it didn't seem to self-level on its own all that much. In other words, unlike most spray sealants that tend to almost evaporate and instantly flash on the surface as you wipe them down, RainX takes a little longer and also requires a few extra cloths to seal an entire vehicle, at least compared to the other two products in this direct comparison. Now again, it's not like it's difficult at all, it's just a touch more time consuming with the need to grab a fresh cloth more often. In colder environments, this could be a little annoying and more time consuming, but in hotter weather, this could actually be an advantage, giving you more work time and flexibility to work larger areas before the sealant begins to streak and become difficult to wipe. Armor All Ceramic has a slightly different recommended application, which is basically to use a damp cloth for your primary wipe before switching to a dry cloth for your final streak-free wipe down. Now, this isn't unique to Armor All, as a number of spray sealants on the market also recommend using a damp cloth. And after trying this sealant with dry cloths only, I also recommend you stick to the recommended application with a damp cloth, as the user experience does become quite horrible with a sticky and time-consuming application if you don't. Now, when used with a damp cloth to spread the product in, I had absolutely no issues. It's fairly easy, and then switching to your dry cloth is equally easy to buff streak-free. However, I think it's only fair to mention that when comparing a dry application in terms of looks, feel, and performance, the results I obtained were far better compared to using the recommended wet application. So, although it's almost necessary to use a damp cloth in order to wipe it down, it did also seem to degrade the results, at least based on my own testing. Bowden's own bead machine has again a slightly different application in that they recommend applying the sealant directly to your primary cloth rather than spraying it onto the panel section. Now, this is really just to avoid overspray spotting the finish, especially on a windy day, but in truth it's no different from any spray sealant and won't change the results regardless of whether you apply it to the paint or to your cloth. With that said, at least for me, Bowden's own had the most typical or familiar user experience. It wiped in and flashed over the paint as most spray sealants do, and without the need to use a damp cloth or to wipe for extended periods. In other words, it was very quick, easy, and straightforward to apply. Now, I'm not saying it was the best user experience I've had with any spray sealant, as you certainly don't want to work overly large areas or in direct sunlight, which will degrade the application. But as a whole, I had absolutely no issues when used as directed, and in this comparison, it was by far the best user experience of the three. After the panels were allowed to fully cure, the next area of assessment was their ability to amplify the look of automotive paint. Now, as you may know, I try and film these videos in a way that also allows you guys to judge the results. So apart from my own assessment of what I was seeing in person in all the on and off camera testing, you're also welcome to draw your own opinions. Starting with RainX, I have to say that its ability to improve the finish of paint in terms of gloss, saturation and filling capabilities is a little disappointing. Now, I could certainly see a slight improvement as far as increased gloss goes and a touch of added saturation with perhaps just a hint of masking performance, but as a whole, on every test panel I applied it to, it just wasn't all that amazing in terms of looks, but at least it did do something to improve the finish. Armor All, on the other hand, had next to no visual improvement whatsoever. It's honestly pretty rare to test a wax sealant or coating that does so little to improve the look of paint that you have to squint to actually even detect that it's on the surface. I realize that looks, or at least improving the look of paint with a sealant, isn't everything, but it's a little troubling that Armor All would find this acceptable, and I'll leave it at that. Bowden's own bead machine just couldn't have been more different. Even just walking up to the test panels from a distance, its section just immediately jumps out with such a deep, rich and glossy finish that looks pretty fantastic. No sealant could ever mask all the haze and swirls on this test panel, but it's also done a good job at filling in a decent portion of them. All in all, there's no denying that Bowden's own looks amazing, and unfortunately there's no denying that the other two look pretty average, to put it nicely. Next up was assessing the slickness these paint sealants create in their finish. Slickness can greatly aid wash mitts and towels in gliding over the surface of paint with reduced friction, helping to avoid cleaning and drying swirls. I'll start by saying that all three products do in fact create a nice slick finish that's perhaps a little better than most car waxes, sealants or coatings in general. So all in all, I think they did extremely well in this area. However, it's fair to say that Armor All wasn't quite as slick as the other two, showing a touch more friction in its finish by comparison. Between RainX and Bowden's own, it was much closer as both were extremely good in this area. But I would give a slight advantage to Bowden's own here, just being a touch ever so slightly slicker than RainX, but in all honesty, it was a negligible difference. So onto some water behaviour testing to discover the hydrophobic performance of these car sealants. Now, as I continued to introduce various amounts of water and diverse water spray patterns over the test panel, what you'll hopefully see is that across the board there's at least some relatively good hydrophobic behaviour in terms of the water sheeting rates and water bead contact angles. In other words, I don't think any of them are terrible in this area, though some are certainly far better than others. Now, the other thing to mention here is that not everybody wants or desires an extremely hydrophobic finish, which is absolutely fine. However, all three of these brands do in fact describe these products as being extremely hydrophobic, so I think it's completely fair to judge them as the brands themselves describe them. Starting with RainX, I've got no issue whatsoever with its hydrophobic behaviour. I think it sheets the water at an adequate rate, the water bead contact angles are certainly acceptable, and overall it's perhaps a middle of the road performer here, not being the best or worst, but fair and decent. So I'd accept a claim of good or potentially even great hydrophobic performance, but its self-described claim of having top of the line hydrophobicity is just overly inflated compared to dozens of other sealants on the market that are simply better in this area. I think Armor All in terms of hydrophobic behaviour certainly gets a pass. Although its water bead contact angles are a little flatter and more oddly shaped, and its water sheeting rates are a little slower than the rest, it's not like it's terrible here, just a little behind the curve. So once again, if Armor All claimed it had decent or even good hydrophobic performance, I'd 100% call that a fair claim. However, the brand's self-described claim of extreme water-beating performance is again overly inflated compared to the reality of dozens, if not hundreds, of existing paint sealants that are simply far better in this area. From the way it almost instantly breaks the water tension to rapidly sheet from the surface, to the way it creates these beautiful propped up water beads with tiny pearl-like shapes, there's just no denying that Bowden Zone is in fact an extremely hydrophobic paint sealant that's simply in a league beyond the other two products here. So when the brand claims a super hydrophobic finish for sweet bead porn and water sheeting, it's actually refreshing to test a product that actually lives up to the brand's claims. The final test in this comparison was a chemical resistance assessment to help predict the potential environmental resistance of these three spray sealants. I used CarPro Multi-X all-purpose cleaner at a 1:3 dilution ratio, firstly just lightly treating the panel and then getting more and more aggressive with each subsequent application. Just like the previous water behavior test, I wouldn't say any of these sealants were overly bad in terms of chemical resistance. As at least to start with, they all showed some potential durability, meaning that a couple of months is certainly possible with any of them in real-world environments. But in saying that, there was most certainly some real differences in how well they held up and will most likely last on car paint. Starting with RainX, I couldn't find any durability claims from the manufacturer, so I'm not sure what durability timeframe the brand predicts. But with that aside, I actually thought it did fairly well here, showing some great resistance to the chemical to start with, and even as I got more aggressive, it still kind of hung in there to some extent, leading me to believe that based on prior testing, that a few months of durability is certainly achievable, and in some cases it could last even longer depending on the environment. Armor All has the most optimistic durability claim of the bunch, stating up to 100 washes, or I guess 2 years if you wash your car weekly. Now, during all my on and off camera testing, Armor All showed the least chemical resistance of the bunch in every test I performed quite consistently. Now, I think that in certain cases where perhaps a vehicle is always garaged and not driven daily, it could perhaps last a number of months and who knows, maybe even a year. But in most normal use conditions, I would be extremely surprised to see this sealant last more than a couple of months, meaning that 100 washes seems like one heck of a long shot based on my testing. I think it's fair to say that Bowden Zone did extremely well in this final chemical resistance test. Now, it's not like it wasn't affected by the chemical at all, as by the end it certainly started to show signs of being compromised. But the fact that chemical hit after chemical hit, it just simply kept on sheeting and beating the water quite impressively, does indicate to me that it should hold up pretty well in a real world environment and far longer than the others. Bowden Zone states a 3 to 4 month durability claim, which I think is very acceptable, if not underrated. And for me, this is again refreshing to see a brand not overhype claims but rather restrain them. Now, as you guys have a look at the water behavior and chemical resistance on the second test panel, which should show some very similar results, I'll sum up this video with my own personal thoughts and opinions. If you take nothing else away from this video and comparison, I hope you take away the overwhelming results and conclusions that it's not about what a product contains in terms of graphene, SiO2 or other more traditional polymers, but rather what a brand does in terms of testing and development to create something like a fantastic car wax sealant or coating. In other words, it's not about what you use, it's all about how you use it. As someone who's been fortunate enough to be part of a lot of detailing product testing and development throughout the years, the one overwhelming conclusion I've come to in testing any product is that there's so much BS in what I'm told about how products will perform and why they are superior that simply doesn't translate when the product meets car paint. I'll put my hand up being guilty of sometimes geeking out on all the science and chemistry that's honestly really fascinating at times. But one thing I've learned is that all these chemistry advancements mean absolutely nothing if a brand isn't willing to put that R&D into testing after testing to really fine-tune it into something great. That's where the real work, time and cost comes in, as well as having the right people with the right skills and knowledge to scrutinize and impose their own high standards. That's what creates new and amazing detailing products, not graphene content, not ceramic chemistry, and certainly not overhyped claims. It's hard work, honesty, and know-how. In a world where 90% plus of all detailing products are fine, they're fine. Do we really need more of these average products with sensationalized labels and claims? Ultimately, you get to decide this with your dollars. So if you support the brands that give you nothing new and more of the same with just fancier ingredients and descriptions, that's what you're going to get more of. But if you support the brands that push the envelope and actually deliver superior results, that's also what you're going to get more of. I think I'll leave it there, guys, and if you enjoyed this video and would like to say thanks and help support future content, you can do so by buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/ccad, in which I'll have a link to in the description box, or you can now hit the thanks button below the video, and thank you everyone for the support so far. As always, I really hope you guys enjoyed and found this video useful. Please share it with others, give it a like and comment below to show your support for this content, and I'll see you guys soon.